Tony Khan has been exposed for listening to Jim Cornette. What a world we live in, man. Now, I know Tony, a while ago, few years ago, said that he is a fan of Jim Cornette, right? But I didn't think that Tony Khan would actively listen to Jim Cornette on his drives from one event to another. He's been exposed for that by Jimmy Jacobs, who was apparently he was part of the creative team because they tried to make it look like they fired him, I think, and then they tried to make it look like all the bad stuff that was happening on AEW was all the fault of Jimmy Jacobs, and they used him as a scapegoat, okay? Now, Jimmy Jacobs went on bodyslam.net and said that he had nothing to do with the creative process. He was just the middleman to tell wrestlers what they're supposed to do when he's been told that information. So that scapegoat is not a scapegoat. Okay, we all know that already because it's been a while now since Jimmy Jacobs was fired and absolutely nothing has changed with AEW. And B, he stated that on drives with Tony Khan, Tony and him would listen to Jim Cornette's podcasts and they agree on things, they disagree on things, and it seems that Tony listens to Jim Cornette. I don't know if he does today because I don't know what year maybe he did this. Maybe it was at the start when AEW first started. But Tony Khan has listened to everything Jim Cornette says and he hasn't implemented any of the criticisms within his television program. He's hearing these things and he's basically actively ignoring these things because I don't know why. Right? It's hard to work out Tony. He's an idiot, man. Tony Khan, and I don't care how much money he's got. Okay, Elon Musk did something a little bit stupid a couple of weeks ago. Maybe, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, he's the richest man in the world, right? Elon Musk makes mistakes, but Tony Khan, he's a fucking absolute 100% moron, right? I don't like him. I've stated various times why I don't like him. I don't believe anyone when they tell me he's a good person, really. Look at all this money he donates to charity. If Hitler donated to charity, does that make him a good person? No. I'm not saying Tony Khan's Hitler, by the way. It's just the first example I could come up with. Tony Khan, he's not a good person. He doesn't take any criticisms. He thinks he's right. He has, I wouldn't say he has a God complex because he's too socially awkward. He has an autistic God complex. That's what we'll call it. We'll call it the autistic God complex. I'm allowed to say that. That's what Tony's got. He's got the autistic God complex. He thinks he's right, but he doesn't understand why. Basically. So, yeah, Jimmy Jacobs exposed Tony Khan for A, listening to Jim Cornette and agreeing with some of the things Jim Cornette says, even though he's not changed anything whatsoever. And B, that Jimmy Jacobs was not anything to do with the... Now, could Jimmy Jacobs be lying? Yes. There's a possibility everyone can lie. But I think he might be telling the truth on this one. I don't know too much about Jimmy Jacobs. I know he was the guy... Didn't he hang around with the Young Bucks when the Young Bucks were outside of Raw in like 2018 or something, 2017? And Jimmy Jacobs went and had pictures with him and everything. I'm pretty sure that's the same guy. But he was used as a scapegoat to make sure Tony isn't the one that looks bad. And turns out, all lies. Because, again, Sean Ross Sapp put out that Tony Khan was going to be in the weeds, right? He was in the weeds creatively a lot more after they had what was supposedly a good episode of Collision. I disagree. But they did that to make it look like that Tony actually had good ideas and that all the bad ideas that we've seen weren't his ideas. In reality, they are his ideas. Chris Jericho, yesterday on Chris Van Vliet, also exposed this basically without meaning to expose it, but he did. He was asked by Chris Van Vliet if Jericho has any creative sway, and Jericho says that he has ideas, but he does exactly what his boss tells him, because he has a boss, right? And I believed him. Even though we all see Jericho and we all see what he's doing, I believed him, right? Tony Khan is the only reason AEW is in the decline it's in. If somebody else was in the place of Tony Khan when AEW had started, it could have gone a lot differently, okay? There would have been a real boss there to sort the stuff out with CM Punk and Hangman and the Young Bucks and everything. There'd have been a boss there to stop all the fights, all the drama, all the mean girl stuff in the locker room. It's ridiculous, man. It is absolutely fucking ridiculous. When we hear about some drama going on in WWE, usually involving Drew McIntyre, it gets squashed. It's either a ruse to get fan interest, or it's real and it gets squashed immediately. Like, that's how it should be done. But instead in AEW, they had way too much drama, and people just didn't care anymore, and Tony Khan doubled down on all the bad things that people didn't like, thinking, I've got the sickos, and the sickos are saying, we're not interested anymore. There's a lot of the sickos that have just had enough. Even they can't stand AEW anymore. They'd rather watch fucking GCW or fucking any of those shitty indies. They'd rather watch that than AEW. They'd rather watch House of Glory, right? They'd rather watch that. Because Tony Khan, he's got such a bad reputation right now. Such a really bad reputation when it comes to handling talent, handling creative, handling everything. People say, it's fine, they've got their max deal. They can easily get cancelled. Warner Brothers Discovery aren't exactly rich. They're in a lot of debt. And increasing that debt with AEW isn't worth it for them, okay? Now, unless AEW is willing to, I don't know, do some political stuff for Warner Brothers Discovery, I think Warner Brothers Discovery would probably fucking axe them within a year or two. Because Warner Brothers Discovery, they're not making the money they want. AEW certainly don't have the interest that they want. And I think that unless Tony Khan removes himself from the creative entirely, we're going to be saying bye-bye to AEW by 2027. I reckon by 2027, unless something majorly changes, AEW will be gone. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that Tony Khan's a piece of shit like I do? Or do you think I'm too harsh on him? I think he's a piece of shit. Like, subscribe, follow me, and XD Crossman25. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.